For nearly 2,000 years, they remained hidden, and now, one of history's most profound secrets is finally coming to light. Why were these scrolls buried for 2 millennia? What were the Essenes trying to conceal? Welcome, seeker of truth, to the mystery behind the mysteries. Today, we unravel a discovery so powerful, it might shake the foundations of belief itself. We're diving deep into the lost world of the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls' ancient texts that have resurfaced to tell a story long buried in the sands of time. In 1946, one of the most groundbreaking archaeological discoveries of the 20th century was made near the Dead Sea. Inside the caves of this desolate region, fragments of ancient manuscripts were uncovered, what we now call the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among them were some of the oldest known versions of the Hebrew Bible, as well as other mystical and historical writings that never made it into the official canon, yet shed light on early Jewish spirituality during the dawn of the Common Era. The scrolls are believed to have belonged to, or at least been preserved, by a secluded community living in Qumran. Many scholars point to a mysterious Jewish sect known as the Essenes. But who were these Essenes truly? And what is their link, if any, to the Dead Sea Scrolls and the hidden world of Qumran? Before Judaism became more centralized, the ancient world saw a wide variety of Jewish sects, each with its own unique approach to faith and interpretation of the divine. While diversity within Judaism still exists today, the differences back then, especially in the centuries leading up to the Common Era, were far more fundamental. In the lands of Judea and Israel, particularly around the sacred city of Jerusalem, where the great temple stood, numerous Jewish groups coexisted, sometimes in harmony, often in conflict. The New Testament and Hebrew Bible even reference these groups, highlighting their presence and influence. Among the most frequently mentioned are the Pharisees, often portrayed as challengers of Jesus alongside the priestly elite responsible for maintaining the temple. But these were not the only sects of their time. The renowned first-century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus offers us a fascinating glimpse into this spiritual landscape in his work, The Jewish War. According to Josephus, there were 3 major philosophical sects within Judaism. First, the Pharisees. Second, the Sadducees, often associated with temple rituals and aristocracy. And third, the Essenes, a group distinguished by their strict, ascetic lifestyle and deep devotion to spiritual purity. But who were the Essenes? Though they appeared to be a significant presence in ancient Judea, by the time Josephus was writing, the Essenes had all but vanished, and yet their legacy remains cloaked in mystery. Unlike the Pharisees or Sadducees, the Essenes left behind very few records. Most of what we know comes from just 3 ancient authors: Josephus himself, the Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, and the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder. Each of these writers gives us a slightly different perspective, but they all agree on one thing: the Essenes were unlike any other group of their time. In a future segment, we'll explore the Qumran community, which may hold key insights into the Essene way of life. For now, we are left with intriguing fragments, whispers of a devout people who pursued holiness in seclusion, and whose spiritual legacy continues to captivate historians and seekers alike. Scattered throughout Judea, there existed a number of reclusive communities, groups that had chosen to live far from the bustling cities. It seems they did so in an effort to remain spiritually pure, distancing themselves from the perceived corruption and worldliness of urban life. Instead, they settled in villages and small, isolated settlements. Philo of Alexandria, writing in his work Every Good Man is Free, estimated their number at around 4,000. Among them, the Essenes stood out, a sect of Jews known for their unusually strict observance of Jewish law. Their lives revolved around worship, ritual purity, and a rigid communal structure. When you joined the Essene community, you gave up all personal possessions. Everything was held in common ownership, and the group was governed by a strict hierarchy, with leaders at the top and new initiates at the bottom. But entry wasn't immediate. Becoming a member required years of training, a period of testing your devotion and discipline. Their daily lives were highly regulated. They spent hours in prayer, studied the Hebrew scriptures with great devotion, and participated in solemn communal meals. Ritual purity was a central theme. They bathed frequently, not for hygiene, but as a spiritual practice. Outside of Sabbath days, most worked in agriculture, contributing to the self-sufficient nature of the community. Evidence suggests this was a male-dominated society, likely celibate, avoiding romantic or sexual relationships entirely in favor of unwavering focus on religious law. However, the historian Josephus records that some Essenes did marry, but only for the purpose of procreation, and only within a strict religious context. Sexual activity outside this purpose was forbidden. In addition to the Hebrew Bible, they may have held other sacred texts, possibly those now known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. These scrolls offer a fascinating window into their worldview and suggest the Essenes were deeply influenced by, or even part of, a broader Jewish apocalyptic movement of the time. They believed in the immortality of the soul, seeing the physical body as a temporary prison. After death, the soul would live on in a spiritual realm, where divine judgment awaited. The righteous would be rewarded with peace in the afterlife, while the wicked would suffer terrifying punishment. These ideas, so prominent in late Jewish thought, would later become central to Christianity and, eventually, appear in Islamic theology as well. As for the Essenes themselves, do we have any of their own writings? That's where the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls comes in. Unearthed in the mid-20th century near Qumran, this archaeological breakthrough changed everything. There are many legends about how they were found, but the most commonly accepted story tells of two Bedouin shepherds who, between 1946 and 1947, stumbled upon a cave near Qumran. Inside, they discovered clay jars containing ancient scrolls. What at first seemed like a curious find would soon become one of the most important manuscript discoveries in history. As the years and decades passed, more caves containing similar scrolls were discovered in the region, an astonishing and truly captivating phenomenon that continues to this day. In fact, as recently as 2021, additional fragments were unearthed under nearly identical conditions. This has made the area one of the most significant contributors of archaeological material since the very first discovery. But what exactly are the Dead Sea Scrolls and what do they contain? Many scholars today refer to them as the Qumran scrolls, and they comprise a wide range of texts. Some are complete scrolls containing entire books of the Hebrew Bible, while others are no more than tiny fragments, just a few words long. The majority of these writings are copies of biblical texts and commentaries on those scriptures, dating back much earlier than any previously known manuscripts. Before these scrolls were found, the oldest existing Hebrew Bible manuscripts were from the 9th or 10th century CE. Now, we have examples that may date as far back as the early centuries, BCE, making them among the earliest known versions of biblical scripture. That fact alone is groundbreaking. Even more fascinating is that many of these scrolls contain only slightly different versions of texts we know today, reflecting a time when scripture was still fluid and evolving before it was standardized into what we now call the Masoretic text, around 180 CE. Most of the textual differences are small, but historically significant. In addition to the canonical books of the Hebrew Bible, the scrolls also contain apocryphal and pseudepigraphical writings, texts not included in most versions of the Bible. For instance, books like Tobit, which appear in the Catholic Old Testament, but not in the Hebrew Tanakh or Protestant Bible. And then there are the pseudepigrapha works that were never part of any biblical canon. Here we find the astonishing and mysterious Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees texts that open a window into ancient Jewish thought and myth. The scrolls also include writings considered sectarian meant for and written by a specific community. These include texts like the Community Rule, the Damascus Document, and the War Scroll, which give us insight into their beliefs, rituals, and daily life. Through these writings, we come to understand a group that likely lived in Qumran, a Jewish sect devoted to strict interpretations of the law and deeply critical of the temple practices in Jerusalem. So, who were these people? Archaeological evidence suggests that the caves where the scrolls were found surround an ancient settlement known today as Qumran. This site appears to have housed a unique community, perhaps the Essenes, who had broken away from mainstream Jewish society. They believed the Jerusalem temple had been corrupted by false priests and chose instead to live apart, in accordance with their own rigorous religious principles. As archaeologist Jody Magnus puts it, they sought to create a place where they could live in absolute purity according to their own interpretation of the law. All in all, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls stands as one of the greatest archaeological finds of the 20th century. Not only has it revolutionized our understanding of Second Temple Judaism and the context of early Christianity, but it also provides a rare and intimate glimpse into the spiritual world of a community lost to time. Qumran was occupied by members of a broader movement that emerged in the mid-Syrian century BCE, separating from the remaining Jewish community in Judea. This sect, which had stricter interpretations of Jewish law compared to the mainstream, seemed to believe that the cult practices at the Jerusalem temple were flawed and that the law was not being properly followed. They instead established their own hierarchical community, centered around priests descended from the Zadokite line, who had previously led temple worship in Jerusalem. Membership was exclusively for adult men deemed worthy, and the process of joining appears to have taken many years. Once admitted, it seems that members were required to relinquish at least a portion of their wealth to the community as a whole. As we can see, the Qumran community appears to be just one settlement within a larger movement or group in Judea. Archaeological evidence suggests that approximately 150 to 200 individuals likely resided in the settlement. Looking at texts such as the Rule of the Community, it's clear that this was a particularly strict environment. Members of the broader community were allowed to marry and have children, but the group at Qumran led a celibate life. Their lives were governed by a very strict set of behavioral rules. They were meticulous in following every aspect of Jewish law, and there were severe penalties for non-compliance. Those who failed to adhere to the rules could be excommunicated or punished for even what might seem like minor transgressions. For instance, the Damascus document mentions that if a person were to accidentally fall asleep during a communal meeting, they would be expelled for 30 days and required to pay a 10-day penance. In addition, one of the central aspects of their daily life was the strong emphasis on ritual purity, especially through communal meals and regular purification. The members regularly purified themselves in mikvahs, ritual baths, which were not only physically important, but also held significant religious meaning. As noted by Jody Magnus Court, the sectarians lived as though their community was a virtual temple or tabernacle. Therefore, they adhered to the same strict regulations regarding purity, including the cleanliness of water, food, drink, and utensils. In place of the daily sacrifices at the Jerusalem temple, the Qumran community replaced this practice with 2-day communal prayers. While sacrifices may have still taken place, the community essentially became its own form of temple, anticipating a future salvation that would restore the true temple in Jerusalem, which they believed would be led by the real Messiah. The priests saw themselves as the true Israel, and as indicated in their sectarian scrolls, they believed the end times were imminent, with the community representing the sons of light, on the brink of the new messianic era. These powers, known as the Son of Darkness, were destined to engage in a 40-year-long war. In the end, the victors, the Sons of Light, would drive the Romans out and establish true worship at the Temple of Jerusalem. This conflict held cosmic significance, as it mirrored a battle between the good and evil forces, represented by angels and demonic powers of Satan in the earthly realm. In other words, the Quranic community was undoubtedly part of a larger movement from ancient times known as Jewish apocalypticism. These ideas are reflected in the scrolls discovered in the caves surrounding the Quranic area. They contain the origins, practices, and future prophecies related to the community's beliefs. As mentioned earlier, the community strictly followed the laws of the Torah and emphasized purity rituals like mikvah baths and communal meals. Another key aspect of the Qumran community was their use of the solar calendar, in contrast to the lunar calendar followed by other Jews. This led to significant differences in the dates of sacred festivals, which likely created tension with their neighbors in larger towns and villages. The community itself was highly hierarchical, with the priests holding supreme authority, including a leader known as the Emmebaker, who presided over the group as the headmaster, instructing them on how to live according to the laws. When it comes to the origins of the sect, we have only a few clues. The Damascus document mentions a figure referred to as the teacher of righteousness, someone who interpreted the Torah correctly and guided the community, contrasting with what they saw as the misinterpretation or errors of the priests in Jerusalem. The historical identity of this figure remains uncertain, as it is concealed behind the title, and there are other anonymous figures mentioned in the scrolls, such as the wicked priest and the Lar, whose identities are still debated. The wicked priest and the Lear are thought to refer to figures associated with the priesthood in Jerusalem. Jonathan Maccabeus, a key figure in the Maccabean revolt and a leader of the Hasmonean dynasty ruling Judea, is often considered a possible candidate for these figures, although scholars disagree on the details. However, it's relatively clear that these figures represent the enemies of the Qumran community, particularly the Pharisees and Sadducees, other Jewish sects of the time. The teacher of righteousness has been theorized to be various figures, including John the Baptist, Jesus himself, or even James the Just. While these theories are largely rejected by modern scholars, the Hebrew term, Zadokite, associated with righteousness, suggests a connection to the Zadokite priesthood. Following the Maccabean revolt, the priests who lost their monopoly over the temple may have founded the Qumran community, viewing the new priestly class in Jerusalem as illegitimate. This leads us to the million-dollar question: was the Qumran community Essene? It is likely that the majority of contemporary historians of science would argue that these individuals truly held these beliefs. You may have noticed that the depictions of scenes by ancient writers, such as Josephus and Philo, bear a striking resemblance to the ideas and practices outlined in the Quran. When it comes to celibacy and many other aspects, there are some truly fascinating details about the beliefs of the Quranic community. In fact, I turned to Dr. Andrew Henry from the Breakfast Theology channel to gain more insight into a particular aspect of their theology. Thanks, Philip. One of the reasons many scholars believe in the Qumran community lies in a passage where Josephus compares the Sadducees, Pharisees, and Essenes. He mentions that the Essenes were somewhat skeptical about free will and believed that fate was the master of everything. According to them, nothing would happen to people unless it was in line with divine will. In contrast, the Sadducees entirely rejected fate, emphasizing free will, while the Pharisees took a middle position. The Essenes' theological stance on fate could be described as a strong form of determinism. In other words, they believed that God absolutely knew and controlled future events, and that free choice was denied. This strong determinism is reflected in the Dead Sea Scrolls, particularly in a sectarian document known as the community rule. Dr. Kloans refers to this as the clearest expression of fate in all ancient Jewish literature, explaining that everything that comes from the knowledge of God exists and will exist. He adds that all designs were created before they existed, and when they emerge, their duties align with his magnificent design. The text continues, stating that God commands the righteous to walk in the light and the wicked in the darkness, which again suggests a predetermined fate. This could provide further evidence that the Qumran community was indeed an Essene community. However, not all scholars agree that Josephus is describing a concept of fate influenced by Greek philosophy. Some argue that the more dualistic concept of fate, known to the Qumran community, may be different. Nevertheless, the similarities cannot be ignored. Philip, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks, Andrew. And everyone should check out the incredible work on the Breakfast Theology channel. Philo also claimed that around 4,000 Essenes lived in Judea, scattered across various regions. Qumran is thought to have been one such community. Furthermore, one of the most thought-provoking pieces of evidence comes from the third source about the Essenes, the elder Pliny. Pliny writes, "These scenes depict a people unlike any other, who are completely devoid of women and reject love entirely." Under these scenes, one could find only palm trees accompanying them, and a town once rich in palm branches and blessings, now reduced to ashes in Engedi, which once rivaled Jerusalem in fertility. From there, they would journey to the Masada fortress. It seems that Pliny the Elder placed an Essene settlement just north of Masada. Along the shores of the Dead Sea, sites like Engedi and Qumran have led many scholars to conclude that the Qumran community may, in fact, have been a group of Essenes. Still, it's important to note that this idea isn't universally accepted. Some academics remain skeptical due to the lack of direct evidence, and the debate continues to this day. That said, the majority of scholars now acknowledge a strong connection between the Qumran community and the Essenes. If we accept this link, it suggests that the Essenes were likely the authors, or at least the custodians of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This group appears to have been a unique Jewish sect, separate from mainstream groups like the Pharisees and Sadducees. They were governed by a priestly class and strict overseers who held absolute authority. The Essenes viewed themselves as the true keepers of the faith, especially after the temple in Jerusalem became, in their eyes, corrupted. In Qumran, they formed a community with strict adherence to the law, shared communal meals, and practiced ritual purification. Deeply influenced by apocalyptic Jewish literature, they believed the end of days was near, that the dead would rise, and that divine judgment was imminent. Despite their once significant presence in ancient Judea, the Essenes seem to vanish from history shortly after being mentioned by historians like Josephus. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 CE had a catastrophic impact on Jewish society. Groups like the Sadducees and the Qumran community did not survive the Roman assault and were essentially wiped out. It's widely believed that, as Roman forces approached, the Qumran community hid their sacred scrolls in nearby caves, a theory supported by the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in those very locations. Among the most fascinating texts found were the books of Enoch, remarkable apocalyptic writings that, while influential among the Essenes, never made it into the mainstream biblical canon. The only exception is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which still includes the Book of Enoch in its Bible today. If you're curious, I highly recommend exploring these texts. They offer not only gripping insights into the beliefs of the Qumran sect, but also shed light on what Judaism looked like in that era. More importantly, they provide context for understanding Second Temple Judaism during the time the New Testament was written. Considering all of this, few would argue against the claim that the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls is one of the most significant archaeological finds of the 20th century, if not of all time. Now it's your turn to reflect, question, and decide. What do you think about the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you found this journey through ancient mysteries intriguing, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon. It helps more people discover these forgotten truths and maybe even awaken to them. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious.